So this is Pentecost Sunday. So we're going to be reading, we're going to be talking about the apostle of the Acts that we see in Acts. So when we talk about Pentecost, a lot of times we think it's just a Christian religion that came from what Christ did. Actually, the Jews, for Pentecost, it was a celebration that they had during their times. It was a festival that we would see. It was the festival of the harvest. One harvest was beginning, one harvest was ending. The barley harvest was ending, and the wheat festival was starting. And this was one of the pilgrimages that the Jews had to make to Jerusalem during the year. So Jerusalem would have been busy with the Jews coming from all over the world. And when I say all over the world, what would have been the known world then would have been the Greek and Roman world around the Mediterranean. That was Mediterranean Sea, which would have been the known world from them. And they would have all come and gathered in Jerusalem for this festival, which was also known as Pentecost to them. And there are some other names you might have heard as well. And here they gathered all together in Israel and in Jerusalem. But before that, we see him. We see the 12, most likely in the upper room, and all of a sudden, this wind, a rush of a violent wind, filled the entire house where they were sitting. Now, one of the things we talked about in our pub theology this last week was that the wind itself that came in was what they felt, or was it the sound of the wind that came in? Which is an interesting way to think about it. And one of the things I talked about in our pub theology is if anybody's ever been in a tornado, the one thing that you hear in a tornado, it sounds like a train is coming at you. It's the sound that gets you first instead of the wind. So was it the sound or was it the actual wind? But the other thing I want to look at is it says it was a violent wind. Here's the Holy Spirit coming. You think the Holy Spirit would come in a peaceful, wonderful manner. But no, we see that the Holy Spirit, it comes in a violent, either sound or feeling. And it came over the disciples that were sitting in the room, and they were filled with the Holy Spirit. And now we see the tongues, and why we were read. The tongues of flames came over the heads of the disciples and rested on them. And once again, they were filled, and they began to speak in their own languages, and everybody began to hear each other's own languages. Kind of how I interpret this, and when I was reading through Acts and the studies that I do, this is a demonstration of the old church and the new church coming into existence. A lot of people think that the Spirit might not have been around prior to Pentecost. Well, if you read in the Old Testament, and even before with Jesus, the Spirit has always been around there. If you want to read a book a good book about the Spirit, which isn't in the Protestant Bible, but it's in the Catholic Apocrypha, is Wisdom, the Book of Wisdom. I encourage you to read that one because it's a lot about the Holy Spirit. But what we're seeing now is that the Spirit has come upon us individually. It's no longer a spirit that's out there. It's here. It's in us. It lives within us, and it has given us the ability to love one another. It also fulfills what Jesus has said that would come. That we last couple weeks we've talked about, that the Spirit would come upon us. And here, what Jesus has talked about is fulfilled, that the Holy Spirit has come upon his disciples, and what we'll read about in a minute, that has come across all the people that were gathered there that day. So one other thing what we want to talk about, what is the Spirit that he's talking about? And Kevin says the word spirit or wind so rough, and I can't say it as good as Kevin does, but the Spirit that has come upon him. What is this Spirit? I think of the the three parts of the Trinity, I think the Spirit is one of the more difficult ones to get a grasp of, to understand. The Spirit does live in our heart. It's there with us. And that's why we celebrate Pentecost today, is because a lot of people say it's the birth of the church. I don't necessarily think it's the birth of the church. I think it's the point where now we see the Spirit coming upon us, and it's empowering us to be the church, to go out into our communities and to celebrate what Christ has done for us, and to continue to do the work that Christ has asked us to do. And we're seeing it on this day of Pentecost, as the disciples are gathering and they're hearing each other's languages. This isn't what in the gospel in Paul's writing, where we hear about tongues and people being able to speak tongues, and we heard it in the First Corinthians about the tongues and being able to interpret tongues. I think this is a different interpretation. I think this is they're actually hearing each other's different languages and being able to understand the different languages that we're speaking. It also kind of reminds me of an event that happened in the Old Testament with Tower of Babel, and the people were thinking they were getting better than God, and they built this temple to heaven because they wanted to be as great as God. And so God took away the one language and made them all separate languages for them not to be able to speak and to be able to be as great as God. But here we're seeing that being reversed, that everybody is once again can hear and understand one another. It's almost a reversal of the Tower of Babel. And everybody can hear their languages. And like I said, Gail did a great job pronunciating all these different languages that were being spoke at this time of Pentecost. And now we see also the opportunity where Peter steps up to be the person I think Jesus had seen in him from the very beginning. This individual who, during Jesus's time, and I've talked about, he's the one that opens up his mouth and sticks his foot in it a lot of the times. But he's the one that asked the questions that everybody else was scared to ask. And Jesus saw the leadership gifts that Peter had. And now we're seeing him by him standing up and raising his voice and addressing those in Jerusalem. But what we can't miss is that the 11 were also behind Peter, supporting Peter in what he was about to do, about to make this sermon about what is to happen and what they were supposed to go out and do. Now we see a different Peter. We see the gifts that Jesus saw in Peter, which was good. Because Peter was no longer afraid to get up and to speak. And he became the rock that Jesus had asked him to become. Now I want to turn my attention to 1 Corinthians, verse 13. For in one Spirit we all baptized in one body, Jews or Greek, slave or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. As we look at our world today, we see a lot of division. We see a lot of hate, a lot of injustices that are going on within our world. But we read this text today, and what I see is, if we believe in the Spirit that came upon us on Pentecost, that we can be united through this Spirit, that we can be united through Christ and through what Christ has done for us. But we continue to want to compartmentalize ourselves into different groups and in different boxes. I think that's kind of the issue that we have today in our nation, is that we don't see each other as being one in the Spirit, but we see one another as being this or that. We need to stop and focus on what Christ has done for us, and also to look at when Christ said, or when the Pharisees came to to Jesus and asked him, what is the greatest commandment of all? And Jesus said, love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. We've forgotten how to love one another, to be in community with one another through the Spirit. We're seeing this in our country today, that we have forgotten what it is to love. And it's not the love of agape love. It's God's love. It's not a feeling, it's an action. It's like the Spirit coming upon the people. It's an action. Now we need to take that Spirit that we've seen in this world and to go out into this world and to be the love that Christ has shown us. We live in a world that needs that love, that agape love, to make a difference where we live. And it starts with us. It starts with the one we see in the mirror every day. It's us that can make a change, can make those changes. But we have to be willing, like the disciples were and the people that were in Jerusalem during the first Pentecost, to let the Holy Spirit come upon us, to enter us, and to be with us. These are hard times that we're living in, but we have to remember that Christ is with us. The Holy Spirit is with us. He lives within our hearts. But are we willing to be and to do what Christ wants us to do? And that's like the million-dollar question. Do we want to do the work that Christ has put upon our hearts? I, for one, am ready to do the work that Christ has asked me to do. I'm asking each and every you today on this Pentecost Sunday, as we celebrate the Holy Spirit coming upon us, are we willing to continue to do the work that Christ has asked us to do? To do that hard work, to love somebody who is different from us, to love somebody who we think that we hate. We need to continue to love. We need to continue to do the work that Christ has asked us to do, as hard as it is. And we can. And I know we will. So let's start today to go out into our communities, into our neighborhoods, and to love and to show the world that we can be different. Let's do and be as Christ has asked us to be in these times that we're living in today. Amen.